October 31st is a historic day for Australia's border protection policy. 16 years ago, it opened the Manus Island detention centre in Papua New Guinea. Now, it will be shut down permanently. As part of Australia's border protection measures, asylum seekers arriving by boat have been flown to offshore processing facilities in two other Pacific nations, Papua New Guinea and Nauru. The Australian government's policy is to block any refugees from resettling in Australia if they try to enter by boat. The UN has called Australia's offshore detention program cruel and inhuman, and in contravention of international human rights. But last year, a PNG court ruled that the facility on Manus Island was unconstitutional, and the Australian government has had to close it down. There are about 600 men, asylum seekers from places like Iran, Afghanistan and Sri Lanka who are still inside. Some of these men have spent up to 4 years at the detention centre.
I landed at the Manus Island detention centre against my will in September 2013. My happiness and my future has been taken by the Australian government. My life has been destroyed.
This year, a group of Manus Island detainees was awarded a $56 million settlement after launching Australia's largest human rights class action. The men said they had suffered physical and psychological injury from their detention. The Australian government said the money was not an admission of liability. The Manus facility itself was opened in 2001, closed in 2008 and reopened in 2012 when there was a sharp rise in the number of people trying to reach Australia by boat. Stopping those kinds of asylum seekers was a core election promise of the coalition, which went on to win the 2013 election.
And we'll stop the boats with tough, proven policies.
It's a message the country's two major parties have both echoed.
We cannot allow migration to Australia to be carried out by people smugglers.
There is no humanity in a government that puts in place a legislative framework against advice that can and did have the effect of luring vulnerable people to their deaths.
The men who are still on Manus Island have been offered the chance to return to their home countries or a place at the Nauru detention centre. Some have been admitted into a US refugee program. Others have been told they can resettle in Papua New Guinea, but many don't feel they'll be safe if they leave the facility. The Australian government says it will find a solution, but right now there are no immediate answers for the men on Manus Island.
Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined from Melbourne by prominent human rights lawyer Julian Burnside, and from Darwin, Brad Vermeer. He is a member of the country Liberal Party, which is part of Australia's ruling coalition. Thanks both so much for joining us. Julian, let me start with you. We're talking about a facility that at its maximum only hosted around 1,300 people. Compare that to the Calais jungle camp, for example, which hosted about 6,000 at one point. So how has the Manus Detention Centre left this big of a scar on Australia's human rights record, and will shutting it down be able to rectify that?
It has left a scar because it is one example of Australia's policy of locking people up indefinitely if they try to seek asylum in Australia. Now, you referred to it as a detention centre. It was a detention centre until the Papua New Guinea Supreme Court said that detaining innocent people indefinitely was unconstitutional, and so it has been an open centre for the last year or so. So in other words, people are free to come and go if they want, but they are not willing to be forced out of it because they're terrified of the locals.
Okay, and do you think, though, closing it down now can help rectify the damage that it's done to Australia's reputation as a developed country that supports human rights?
No, I don't think so, because we're still holding hundreds of people on the Pacific island of Nauru. Manus has been used primarily for unaccompanied men. Nauru has been used primarily for family groups, unaccompanied children and unaccompanied women. And you know, we have this really brutal policy of locking up human beings who've done nothing worse than ask for protection from persecution. And almost all of them turn out to have valid claims for refugee protection.
Okay, let me just get Brad's response to that. And Brad, tell us as well about how you feel shutting down this detention center will affect, perhaps, Australia's role now in protecting, or better treating, I should say, asylum seekers in the country.
Look, the coalition government, since coming to office, has had a clear policy when it came and when it comes to illegal maritime arrivals. Individuals who wish to enter Australia via people smuggling and by boat will not be settled in this country. The current Manus Island regional processing facility has closed as of today, and this facility, the inhabitants of this facility have known since at least May that this facility was going to be closed. They've had the opportunity to move to, I believe, 3 other facilities, depending on the progress or the status of their application. So Australia and these facilities are offering the same, if not better, standards that the current facility was offering. Australia has, due to previous policy settings of previous governments, had issues with huge numbers of individuals seeking to come to Australia by boat via the people smuggling trade. The policy settings of the current coalition government, which came into office in 2013, have stopped these boats from arriving on Australian shores and have stopped needless deaths at sea. These individuals in these centres, if they are found to be genuine refugees, have the option of being settled in Papua New Guinea or in Nauru. There is also the opportunity now, with the deal struck between the Australian government and the former administration, Barack Obama's administration, that 1,250, at least 1,250 refugees will be able to be settled in the United States after proper vetting.
Okay, Julian, let me ask you why that's not good enough. Resettling them, first of all, into camps that are, as Brad was saying, equal or even better conditions than Manus, plus the U.S. refugee exchange program. What's wrong with that as an alternative?
Okay, first of all, Brad has just engaged in the sort of dishonest hypocrisy which characterises the government of which he's part. Calling them illegal maritime arrivals is false. They do not commit any offence under Australian law by coming to Australia and asking for protection from persecution. Second, he says that the coalition was very worried about refugees drowning in their attempt to reach safety in Australia. So worried about them drowning that his government will punish them if they don't drown. Now, the fact is that the government has made it very clear that offshore processing was calculated to make coming to Australia to seek protection so undesirable that people will be deterred from their attempt to come. He says with a sense of pride that the boats have stopped coming. In other words, people are no longer coming to Australia seeking protection. That's because we turn them away before they can reach Australian territorial waters. Frankly, I think what he has said shows just how disgraceful Australia's treatment of boat people has been in the last few years, and his government takes great responsibility for that because it's their dishonesty which enables it to continue to be acceptable, apparently, to the Australian public at large, who don't realise that by calling boat people illegal, you are actually misleading the public about the nature of the people who are seeking protection. Second, I do not think that the fact that the accommodation that they're being forced into in East Lorengau is better accommodation than they had at the processing centre, that doesn't matter a scrap. They are scared of being attacked by the locals. Since the processing centre has been open, a number of the refugees who've lived there have gone to East Lorengau, and they have been attacked in the streets, robbed. They've been attacked with knives and machetes. One person held in the processing centre was killed by a local, actually killed in the camp by a local. And today, just before the camp was closed, the locals raided the security office of Wilson Security, which is supposed to be there to protect the refugees. Their office was raided by the locals, who are now looting the place. Now, you know, it's safety that these people are after. That's why they're seeking protection. They're looking for a place where they can be safe. And they're not safe outside the processing centre.
And on that, Brad, I'd like you to respond, but first, we have spoken actually to a number of detainees in Manus, and one of them, Samad Abdul, said this, which I found quite relevant. He said, "Please, I can survive without food, power, and water, but please save me from Papua New Guinea Defense Forces and locals. Please don't force me to live in the community." That is, of course, because of the attacks that Julian was attesting to there and the abuse that these detainees say they've suffered at the hands of the local community. So, Brad, why is there no security to protect detainees then from local aggression and the alleged abuse then by security forces?
Well, it's simply not true. The security is available at the alternative accommodation that has been provided for individuals who were at the former Manus Regional Processing Centre. The centre currently has no further security because it has been closed, and as of tomorrow will become once again part of a Papua New Guinea naval establishment. The fact remains is that the individuals who are currently in the previous Manus Regional Processing Centre and their advocates were campaigning to have this particular establishment closed. It is closed now, and there are other better facilities available for individuals who are having their applications processed, which provide food, water, accommodations, and security, most importantly. But these offers have not been taken up. They have been on the table for some time. It is also important to note that it is the previous Manus Regional Processing Facility was an open centre. I believe there were up to 200 movements per day to the local town of people who were staying in that particular facility. And so as far as security risks are concerned, there was free movement, and there is security available at the new facilities, which these individuals are being asked to move to.
Brad, quickly let me ask you, if you believe Australia has believed appropriately here and has respected the human rights of these detainees, why did they pay out that $56 million settlement for human rights violations and failure to protect the human rights of these detainees?
Look, that was what is an appropriate settlement that was paid, but let's remember what Australia has been trying to do from the very beginning. We were facing many arrivals by boat to our shores, but also individuals who were seeking asylum were being exploited by people smugglers. What the Australian government, what the coalition did when we were in opposition, and now what we're implementing in office, is and we have achieved, we have not had an illegal maritime arrival in Australia for 3.5 years. The intention of this policy is to stop people from making that dangerous journey to Australia.
Okay. Julian, I caught you rolling your eyes at a couple points there, so let me just get your response.
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting that Brad takes pride in the fact that refugees cannot reach Australia. Australia was one of the main contributors to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that every human being has the right to seek asylum in any country they can reach. We have also signed the Refugees Convention, and yet Brad and his government seem to take pride in the fact that refugees can't reach Australia in order to avail themselves of the right to protection which we acknowledged so proudly in 1948. He also overlooks the fact that if there is security available, it seems to be hopelessly inadequate. Otherwise, how does he explain the knife attacks, the machete attacks, the shooting and killing of refugees who've been in the processing centre? And it's been happening. The first death in the processing centre happened in February 2014, when a local who was on the payroll of the Australian government, a local Papua New Guinean, killed a man called Reza Barati, killed him whilst he was being attacked by 12 other guards, most of them PNG locals, all of them on the Australian payroll. Now, you know, it's disgraceful. We know that the people in the processing centre feel grievously unsafe when confronted with PNG locals. I don't know what's hard to understand about that, but the fact is that these people who were taken there by force, against their will, by the Australian government, it is Australia's obligation now to protect them from the very people who are supposedly giving them protection, but in fact are attacking them and in some instances killing them.
Okay. Brad, I'd like to bring it full circle then, and justified or not, whether you think it's justified or not, the treatment of detainees at the Manus Detention Centre has left a massive scar on Australia's human rights records. You know it's received international criticism, not just from human rights groups, but from various governments around the world. What happens now to those detainees so that your government at least can try and rectify or heal that scar?
Well, the detainees who are currently at the previous Manus Regional Processing Centre have the opportunity to move to the 3 other locations that have been made available as an alternative accommodation. If they still remain, the 600 men still remain in that facility, it will become an active military facility, depending on the date that the Papua New Guinea Defence Force reconstitutes that facility. So ultimately, that issue as to what happens with those individuals will be up to the Papua New Guinea Navy. But the Australian government and the Papua New Guinea government have encouraged these individuals to move to the alternative accommodation services that have been made available to these people. And the important thing to remember here is that they have been encouraged by... I'm sorry, Brad. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut you off. We are completely out of time, but I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers, and Julian Burnside as well. Thank you both.